were torn apart at birth.
That's dramatic.
This is the story of the best part of the sandwich and his crust.
How's it feel to be so irresistible?
Irresistible? Oh, is that what people are saying?
That's it. Ugh, irresistible.
Uncrustables are the best part of the sandwich.
Oh no. Oh no. I'm being raided! Mr. Buzz. Mr. Buzz, what if I told you I had a gift for you? What if I told you I had a gift? I got him. 3 games. He even switched onto his main account. He even switched onto his main account. And oddly enough, it didn't help. It was beautiful. I have no idea why he switched onto his main account, as if that was going to change something. But he gave me legend. He was just such a kind soul, that fella. Such a kind soul. Unfortunately, it was like he was like Robin Hood. He took your elo and gave it to me. Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, you had to beg him. He's a guy for sure. He's a person. he's a person.
Welcome to Nova.
Greetings, Game Reader LTD. Greatest. Oh, greatest. I was like, what? I was confused. If I get greedy here, I'm gonna do something crazy. Something wild. I'm gonna pull my pants down, see what happens. How are you doing? Did the games go well after after the shenanigans ended? I think I saved the Sarah all day long. Sarah lives, right? I'm Fiesta, by the way. I guess I could leak. Nice.
All right, so everybody asked me about workers. Workers. When do I push? When do I not? How much should I push? How much should I not? And generally speaking, I have the old video on workers, but it's a little outdated, and I figured it was kind of time for an update. And I think, judging by what chat said and what everyone else has said, this, I think, is a good point. So generally, most opens in Legion should allow for 4 workers. Count them, 1, 2, 3, 4. But that's not always the case. 3 workers to 5 workers is kind of the good zone. 2 worker opens, generally you're speaking, going to be pretty bad if you don't know what you're doing with them. Egg is one of the ones that is a 2 worker open and can work out for you. Sakura is another 2 worker open that can work, but you shouldn't be just dropping down 250 value with no general idea or reason behind it. So I think you should realistically look for openers that are more in the, like the 200 or less value range if you want to be pushing adequately, as well as getting good value in the early game, right? So like a Nightmare, which is 185, is usually a pretty good opener. It's going to allow for 4 workers guaranteed, 5 workers pretty commonly, depending on what you have to support it. Green Devil, if you receive Ascend on 1, is almost always going to be a 5 worker open. And it's going to give you a really easy hold on 1, 2, and 3. Generally going to be pretty nice as long as you have supporting units. Gate Guard is by many people's accounts, a pretty safe 5-worker open. You're not going to leak very hard to a snail, but you're also going to have good value on, again, 1, 2, and 3, so long as you have good supporting units, even with a leak on 1. Bone Crusher is one of the few openers that you can traditionally go 6 workers and still hold a snail resend on 2 if you have the adequate units to support it. Oftentimes it's going to be best with something like cash out, right? So keep in mind what units you have for openers dictates what you're able to do for opening worker push. Now this gets into like how you should actually utilize workers in the early game. More often than not, you should never push to a no send. Generally, most people should never push to a no send. If you haven't received a send, they're probably going to leak you, which then in turn is bad. It's just, you want to hold as much as you can at all times. And then at the end of the day, the rule of thumb for when you receive sends in a normal game is 40 Mythium received, right? Let's say you get a lizard, a DT, a snail, double snail, I should say, or 2 king ups, right? 40 received. When you get 40 Mythium, you push 1 worker, right? That includes mercenaries and king ups, any combination of the 2, right? If you receive 60 or 20, there is situations in which you can push 2 workers off of a 60 or a worker off a 20. You need to pay attention to your value, though. The value down here in the bottom corner is going to be super important when it comes to how you're actually going to be able to push, right? So if you receive 60 and you go into the next wave, you have 50 gold extra, and it's saying you're 70 over or 50 over, whatever it may be, you can push that extra worker. But as always, you need to pay attention to how good your units are in the coming waves, etc., to be able to, figure out what's going on here, So if you have, let's say, Pyro or Flower, and you're going into 7 and 8, you may not want to push that extra worker because you're quite pissed on the next coming waves. Now, let's say you're sent a Dino, right, and you receive that 80, you leak 50%. At the end of the day, if you leak 50%, you may only want to push a single worker in that situation, right? Your leaks lose you gold, and if you're in a situation in which you're leaking hard from a send, you need to be careful on how much you're pushing if you want to keep your value on point, right? At the end of the day, you can counteract that by, pushing and sending next, or however you want to go about it. But you should always check your value on the next coming wave to determine if you can, again, push that extra worker. Very similarly to pushing off of a 60 to 2 workers or 20 to a single worker, you need to check your value on the coming wave and make sure you have good value going into things to make sure you can push off that lead. And that's the case if, you receive 120 or 200 send, and you want to push hard, always check that value. The value is the most important thing here. And now, the other thing people often will do is a lot of new players don't send frequently enough. And if you're not sending frequently enough, 3+ waves, I would recommend stretching that 40 to 1 rule, maybe to a 50 or 60 to 1. So if you're, let's say you got to send on 3 and you sent 3, and now you're going to go 6 or 7, and they sent you on 4 or 5 and they skip 6, right? I might not push fully on 5 if I know I'm not going to go till 7, because your value is going to be quite poor on 6 and 7, and they can potentially do a undercut by sending before you, or leak you as much, if not more, on the same wave you send if they have the worker push to do so, right? That's considered being in a starved state. When you haven't sent for an extended period of time, your value will be lower, and therefore your worker push should in turn be lower. Now, let's say you're in a fed state where you're sending every single wave and the opponent's sending every single wave. Now, in those game states, realistically what you can do is you can push more than the 40 to 1 rule, right? So if you sent 40 every single wave, the opponent's sending you 40 every wave, and your value is gaining because you have a lot of income, you have a lot of Mythium to be giving out, right? And you're in a situation in which you're racing workers with the opponent, in that spot, you might want to push more along the lines of a 30 to 1 or a 20 to 1, right? So like, let's say you get a 60 on 7, and I got a bunk, I've got, I don't know, a ranger or whatever, and I'm really strong on 8. Maybe you push an extra worker there, right? Because you're still going to be above value because everyone's sending, and you're also in a situation in which you have the income to sustain more worker push. And so kind of keep in mind how the game is playing out, right? This comes into account in the late game as well as the early game. If it's a fed game or a starved game, that changes a lot of what's going on in the actual game state. And so everything I've said so far is generally accepted as the early game principles, right? So waves 1 to 9, 1 to 10, 1 to even 11, roughly you can get by with doing a 40 to 1, 50 to 1, 60 to 1, 20 to 1, whatever it may be, pushing workers harder in the early game. Now, when you get into late game guidelines, mid game guidelines, things change a little bit. So post wave 10, so going into 11, 12, 13, Mythium generation is increased by 7% per wave. So those 10 workers that you have on wave 10 are going to be producing more Mythium on 11, 12, 13, etc., meaning you don't need to push as much to realistically get the same amount of value out of a worker, as well as the enemy's worker push is going to be stronger as well. Theoretically, of course. Their workers are still going to be 10, 11, 12, but they're going to be getting more Mythium because the Mythium generation is increased. So if you go into wave, say 13, for instance, and they send you 400, you hold the 400, you don't necessarily always want to push 10 workers off that 400. It might seem a little bit, counterintuitive because I just said, 40 to 1, 20 to 1, 60 to 1, whatever it may be. At this point in the game, you need to be paying attention to your value more. So if you're going into wave 13 and you're slightly below value, but you hold, you might want to push, a handful of workers, 5 workers, whatever it may be, depending on the game state, and then check your value and determine, okay, I can push more because we're going to go for a kill shot on 15, whatever it may be, right? It really comes down to how long the save has been into you, right? So when you were last sent, as well as what the early game was like. So in this situation, let's say you got a 400 on 13, but they saved from 9 to 13 to send that on you. That's a 4-wave save, and relatively speaking, a pretty long save by that point in the game, right? At that point, they have saved for about a third of the game to send on to you, right? So you're not going to be pushing as aggressively because at that point, your income and your value are going to be lower because you haven't been able to push and send as frequently, nor have you received as much going into that portion of the game, right? So if they go 9 to 13, you may only want to push 3, 5 workers somewhere in that region, right? But if they've sent you every wave 1 through 10, and then they sent you 11, skipped 12, and sent 13 on that 400, you might be able to get away with pushing more of the 7, 8, maybe 9 or 10 workers, depending on the game state and your value going into it, right? As you get higher in elo, people are going to be able to send more frequently, pushing more heavily, allowing you to push more heavily in the mid game, that 9 to 13-ish region. Now, again, it's always going to come down to that value. Your value is the most important thing, in my opinion, when it comes to how much you should work or push if you're new to the game. You're not going to understand necessarily how good Nightmare is on 13, how bad Green Devil is on 12, right? How good or bad Gateguard is on 11 or 13, right? Because it's always going to depend on what's going on with your entire build, right? The synergies you have, etc. So you need to pay attention to that value marker because that's going to tell you what you're able to do in a lot of situations. At the end of the day, workers are the tools that allow you to put pressure on your enemy, as well as giving you income, and gold needed to hold their sends as well. So if you're not pushing enough, or if you're pushing too much, you're going to hamper your value and potentially give the enemy an in back into the game if you're in the lead. Value is what will win you games, but Mythium and income help you achieve that value to win said game. At the end of the day, disclaimer, if you suck, that's on you, not me. But, at the end of the day, if anybody has questions on anything you see here, any questions on what worker pushes you should be doing in certain situations, always take screenshots or send me screenies in my Discord, and I'll try to diagnose a little bit on what you could do differently or what you could do better. As always, people are more than helpful in my chat, my Discord, the official Legion Discord. Take screenshots, ask questions. The only way to know for sure is to try and learn, right? But if you don't care and you don't want to care, I'm not sure why you're watching this video. But anyway, like, subscribe, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace out.
this world. There are tens of thousands of them.
Thing on me.
I own your body.
It's one word. You don't own shit.
Wait, is that a dog? You're gonna get your dog taken away for how you're behaving. You know that, right?
What is
I'm really
going
scared.
on?
Can you please stop?
I'm scared.
Excuse me.
Oh my gosh. Hey, Nikita, how about we come to this is horrific. This is absolutely horrific. Nikita, calm down.
Those particles are
The angels. There's angels. She's summoning angels. Oh my god. No. What's happening?
Thank you, Open. Thank you. 139 divided by 2. Wow, they had a 70 elo diff. That's quite a bit. That's wow. I mean, what's that calculator out to? It's like 2930 to 2970. Still would like to see the elo calculator. But so be it. You reached 3K? Actually? Did you actually, Mario? No sandbox? No sandbox. Oh, for fun. Yeah. For fun. Thanks for that follow. Sympologist.
114 degrees out.
Really?
Like you said, just for fun. Like I'm aiming for like 2.4. I'm aiming for 2.4. Yog and chat at the same time? No way. That's impossible. Shadow, you're saying a lot of crazy stuff. This Lucy and Drakir sort of. I'm doing great. How you doing, Sympologist? This Lucy Drakir sort of conspiracy. Yog and Yang being in the chat at the same time.
I put the air on.
Here comes Fluff to complain, guys. Look out.
What?
Air is already on.
Oh, well, I put it on more.
Look out, guys. Fluff is gonna drop like 10 messages about how the devs don't listen to him. Warpwing is busted. Big chillin'? Hell yeah, hell yeah. I like this song right now, guys. This is a good song. Listen to this song. Not that song. That's an ad. I'm ready to go back to losing. We got people in a let's just lose everything. I'm telling you right now, my favorite thing to do with McSmurface was beat people and then FF. I did that at least 20 times. So maybe I can find a teammate that is down to win and then lose. If you get what I'm saying. So like we beat them and we steal their glory by FFing. Right? So we're Smurf boosting down to fix our Q times. But we still need to beat them. Like, we still need that. Like, the real key is to have them almost die. Right? Like, they're literally about to die. 10-9 FF. And then it's victory for them. And they're like, what? Alright, we get to play Bleach. Okay. Good luck. Good luck. What? Keep it together. Keep it together. Don't get mad. And they fixed their freaking calculator? Oh, what was the prediction? That was a loss, right? Yeah, I've lost 2 games, so it's a lose. Let's do double down. This leaks, right? I'm actually not sure. This is Chain Fist is like the best unit here. What if I switch it to a Peewee? Peewee's worse, right? All right, we'll win for Ginger. Let's win for Ginger. Jules? I do get snailed, so I definitely leak. Kind of wishing I had that Chain Fist now, right about now. You see what I'm saying? You know, because like it. Oh wait, whoa, this is tight. Oh, this is tight. Oh, that's a 33. That was. I genuinely might not have leaked. Unfortunately, I may not have leaked without the snail. Oh, he gets a juicer too. Is he hacking? No, he added a Peewee. Nobody would do that. Unless they would. And then he's just got the hugest cock of all time. I mean, that thing would have to be just gigantic. But 3 bazookas, that wouldn't make sense though. You're just being stupid at that point. Don't be dumb, bro. That's just so stupid. I don't want to ban you, bro, but that was the dumbest thing I think I've ever heard. Why would I add more value to hold? Unless you're genuinely trying to hold, like, use like 3 bazookas. Because I don't know. I do remember line builds being completely broken. Like, if you remember, like, back in the day, the line builds were the best builds. It's something with the coding. Like, if you build in a line, the coding is actually more proportionate. Add deadly. Does this hold 2 snails solo? Definitely not. Yeah. You leak. You absolute idiot. What a frickin' moron. This guy's so stupid. sold. He sold. He sold. He sold. He sold. Ah, unlucky targeting. Wait, unless I kill the snail. Nice. Give some love to our teammate. We clearly didn't do that with Pipe Hand Woman, and it backfired. Right. We didn't do that. We needed to massage Pipe Hand Woman, just really get him just juiced up, feeling like he's playing a great game, and I didn't do that. But Olive, let's just rub him up, get him feeling good. Do I Fiesta? Tempest is so good here. Yeah, I should. We kill both? Yeah, you a good girl. Yeah, you a good girl. Yeah, you a good girl. Alright, that's actually pretty funny. And see, the joke is, he said me too, but he's champion. It's a champion Green Devil. So he can't. He actually can't be he actually can't be Fiesta. It's like the joke is that like he's not Fiesta. You know, it's like a joke. Yeah, now he overbuilt. I got the leaks I needed. Should be able to run away with this one. No doubter. Oh, teammate's gone. Whoa! Whoa! What the fucks was that? Because he leaked really bad. He got cooked. Or my teammate did ask if I'm holding here. Oh my god, that is just so bad. That is just some horrendous stuff. That will be a blast to get to watch this gameplay the rest of the game. I don't care if I leak. I don't care if my teammate leak. Let's just watch this. This is a masterclass here, guys. 2 games ago, legend. Let's watch this. Actually, 1 game ago, legend. Let's really just take a good look at this one. Learn. Write it. Get a notepad. Notepad. Okay. We just kept the same units. Okay. Looks good. It's gonna hold. It should. It's a Tantrum Hellraiser with 2 Scallywags. Alright. I'm listening. Wait, I have a plan. I have a plan here. It's not a good one. But it is a plan. And not a lot of people have those. That's a pretty good mimic. If it eats. I'm leaking mimic only, but it does get like 30 gold. Kill that last lead, and my broski is going for a nasty, nasty bait into full send 9. Let's see if he catches him. Does he catch him? He's got the Avenger, but he's still quite weak. He's still leaking. Oh, and I get real sent. I get real sent here. I'm definitely leaking. Can we get sub 50? Kill both the brutes. So those brutes are the ones you want to kill. Yeah, that brute right there. Thank you. It's fine. 96. Genius. And this guy is he's a cheater. Olive is a cheater. And this is very weak, so we get king. Little high king for the OG times. Little high king ain't ever hurt anyone. And I mean, this is, how can we lose the game? Yeah. I am on fire, unfortunately. Bad news. It's not good news, it's bad news. I'm trying to think, can I do an APS with this dude? Because I want to do that. I guess I could just put it there to guarantee it. Yeah, but see, the problem is I gotta start losing. I gotta start losing here, effing. If I don't lose, I'm gonna be in danger. These queue times are getting outrageous. Quite under. This is very close to a leak. I think I got him. Yes, duh. Oh shit, bro. Oh my god. Oh my god. Oh man. Fluff, are you still there, bro? Fluff, are you still there? Oh my god. Dude, he smashed his keyboard, bro. There ain't no way. He smacked the shit out of his keyboard. There's no other chance. That keyboard just flew up. No doubter. It had to have. It had to have. There can be no other result. Alright, you're pretty bad here. You're pretty bad here. Okay, you're taking venture. It's not ability damage, is it? Somebody had to play it safe. Woohoo! Guess who's a doofus now? Lag, help, help!
Drachi 5 Ostrich.
And I'm on shutdown. Hey, Ostrich with the 20 months. Seeing me kick Leech's ass. How's it going? Yeah, you did fine. I'm gonna be 500 workers now. Yeah, and you get venture. I like to play. Wondering what to do next. We go income king until they die. So the best play right now is we send them every wave. We send them every wave until they die. That's the plan. Send them every wave. Oh my goodness. I knew I was good, but like this is kind of outrageous. I've reached the point where like I handle business when business needs to be handled, and big boys is still like a 50-50. But like when business needs to be handled, I handle it. When I can handle it, right? Because sometimes you get a teammate that makes it unhandleable, right? Sometimes it is just simply unhandleable. It's just the truth. It's simply the truth that sometimes things are unfixable. It's just the way it is. Okay, we'll go for the full king here. Gonna get a little king. Need to start working on our regens. They'd be dead, 14 by the way. No way, Buzz. Dude, we gotta get you on our server, Buzz. We gotta get you on our server, my man. I'll do like 3 regens and save the rest for the big 14.
On my way.
Gotta get you on our server, man. So sick you're not on our server. Alright, something beautiful just happened in hardcore. Some warlock tried to grief me with pulling ads to me. I kited the ads for like 2 minutes and tried to not reset them. So they evade me and go back on him when he doesn't think about it anymore. And he died. Oh my god. And is that on your gnome? That's on your gnome, right? What level is that at? Yeah, we got... Oh, he does pull out a full... But he's just not going to see this coming. What And your real sending. I love the real send. What level is that at? I need to know. I might not have needed to push those 2 workers. But my boy's got us covered. So I like the aggression.